Middleton joining me on today's show. He's the author of B.L.A.C.K, which is an acronym for Beliefs, Limited, Authentic Cultural Knowledge. George, how are we doing this evening?
Doing well. It's been a good day.
It's been a real good day. So, George, we're gonna jump right into it, man. We're gonna talk about ADOS and the 10-point plan. I know I was just kind of hitting on the conversation of reparations. America has never really recovered from, as Condoleezza Rice called it, a birth defect. Others call it the original sin. I don't like the term birth defect because I think that birth defects are not self-inflicted, whereas sin is self-inflicted. And so ADOS has pretty much put together this plan for, I guess, addressing the issue of reparations. And so we're going to jump right in it. George, quick background about yourself, George, really quick, then we'll jump into the conversation.
Okay, quick background. I am a musician, a therapist, and a mentor. And I operate in any of those categories on any given Sunday through Saturday, working with schools, with a juvenile population, with families. The work I really love doing is combining cognitive therapies with music and art, because that is a really effective medium, and it's having an impact in almost any visual media, visual and audio media, in terms of messaging and controlling or directing thought. So my work is aimed at providing a countermeasure, a cognitive countermeasure, so that you can be more aware of the messages that are coming at us on a daily basis, coming from race to gender to quality of life to politics, to just be more conscious of how we're being impacted on a largely subconscious basis.
Okay, George. So we're going to jump right into it, into the B.L.A.C agenda. And the B.L.A.C agenda specifically is calling for essentially reparations. And they've laid out a political and economic plan that addresses everything from specific repayment for reparations, to dealing with mass incarceration, dealing with the Small Business Association. I mean, we're going to kind of go through it point by point, but it specifically says that it wants to identify specifically Blacks, descendants of slavery, not Black immigrants, not any other minority groups. First of all, what are your thoughts on them separating the two, number one? And number two, do you think that it is politically feasible to actually pull us aside, get the political traction to address a specific group?
Not with the current identity. The goals are worthy, but the platform of identity is going to cancel out any of our effective efforts.
What do you mean? What do you mean cancel out?
Americans, descendants of slavery. That's a real category, but is that an identity of empowerment? Because what we're looking to do is affect change, and it's just like, not to be so cavalier about it, but it's like picking a team name for a sports organization. You want a name that is going to get in the psyche of the opponent you're competing with. If you don't, because this is a mental game. When you're talking about economics, it's not a physical game, it's a mental game. And if you don't have that internal drive of your own internal measure that empowers you, especially when times are tough, then you're operating from a point of weakness. And slavery is not necessarily as significant as a part of it is in our history. It's not an empowering part of our history. It's one of struggle. It's one of constantly being in response, in reaction to. And again, I'm not denigrating that experience, but I don't want to draw on that experience to establish economic respect and achievement.
So if George Middleton could restructure the approach, where would you begin? How would you name and identify it? And I mean, how would you name and identify it, and where would you begin?
I begin with establishing a sense of collectivity. So the American descendants of slavery, is only going to attract certain mindsets that think like that. Because just within our community, we identify by so many labels. From Black, some of us accept Black, some of us reject Black. Some of us accept African American, some of us reject African American, and on and on. Some of us rather be called the N-word and feel a sense of entitlement and pride in the N-word. So for me, it's not so much which is the right word as much as that we're not collective in the word. So we can't be collective as a demographic because there's too many divisions. And when I say collective, I don't mean that we agree on everything, but that we operate at a level of standards in comparison to those that we're competing against. And we don't have that collective level of standards.
Let me ask you a question. You say we don't have that collective level of standards, and you also point out, very eloquently that we're also essentially not monolithic. I mean, obviously there's many different facets to the quote unquote Black community, and this particular movement is trying to identify a specific, and I guess that kind of makes your point. I mean, they're saying specifically descendants of slavery, and we know full well that we know what spinoffs of the criminal justice system, such as day-to-day dealings with police, can't necessarily tell you if you're a descendant of slavery or if you're a newly moved immigrant. And so I kind of understand that. Outside of criminal, like you say that we're fractured in a sense, or we're different groups in a sense. What would bring us together outside of criminal justice? Because whenever and I hate to talk about the recent verdict with the Dallas police officer, but let's be honest, the incidents like that bring this community together. We're always on one accord. If you remember back in, what was it, 1994, when O.J. Simpson's verdict was read, we were all a unified community. Whenever anything happens, in reference to justice, we're unified. Outside of that, is there anything else that would bring us together?
So you're really confirming the premise that I'm laying out, just with those couple of examples. Mm-hmm. All of those are reactionary. Gotcha. They're heartfelt, they're passionate, but it's too late. The verdict's been read, right? So even though that we have a moral high ground that we can work from, is that moral high ground effective in moving us to where we want to go? We can protest and march, and it soothes our emotional frustration, right? It's a very, when you can holler and scream and march in a collective way, it's a therapeutic process because it's a way to let out that anguish and frustration and to get some type of validation of the impact of the experiences that we all are collectively as a demographic experiencing. However, after all that emotional expression has happened, have we moved the ball forward? And in many instances, in all these cases that you named, starting from the O.J. Simpson and even before then, we sang the same song, just in different keys and different arrangements, but it's the same song. This is our life. Why are you doing this to us? We want freedom. We want equality. Stop mistreating us. All of those things, as right sounding as they are, and as much as they should be done, will not convince those that are in power, just based purely off of a moral template, to acquiesce to those cries of anguish. We have to operate from a point of strength. And you have to really question, is the identity that we are trying to use, whether it's Black, American descendants of slavery, even American, because some of us want to say, well, I'm American, I'm not Black, I'm American. That's a nice goal to get to, but is it really where we are right now? Because everybody's playing a race game. No one's really playing a moral game. No one's really playing a patriotic game. They're playing an economic game by race. And so you have to have leverage. And if you don't have leverage, just because you have a moral authority, they'll give you that, but they're not going to write any checks behind it.
On that subject, so back, let's take a step back. Let's go back. Goodness grievous, it's been what, almost 70 years since the civil rights movement. Um, so during the civil rights movement, they had a multifaceted approach. Step one was obviously the protest to gather attention. Step two was, while you're gathering attention, let's grab some political power. And behind the scenes, the economic part, which obviously the movement had to be funded and was privately funded by a lot of the churches and Black celebrities, which kept it going, which also gave them the freedom to say what they wanted to say, so eloquently. And then there was the other economic part, in which the boycotts, they hurt in Montgomery, they hurt they hurt Montgomery, the county, and the public transit system. At the lunch counters, in the process, they hurt businesses. And so fast forward what does that movement look like? First of all, do you agree that you're going to need a multifaceted approach to address this, number one? Number two, what does that look like in 2019, 2020?
Yeah, I agree. It's a multifaceted approach. The solution, though, I've used this example, or I've proposed this solution in many of our Facebook discussions in different groups. And so if you're familiar with it, you may have seen it, because I'm very redundant with the solution. But it's not an original one. It's off of, it's from Dr. Claude Anderson of Powernomics. And he has, the solution is called the 5 levels to control. And he likens it to a 5-story building. The first floor is economics. The second floor is politics. The third floor is media. The fourth floor, I'm missing one of these. Media. The last floor, I'm going to skip to the last floor, which is education. And there's one other floor that'll come to me when I'm talking about. But the most important floor in that 5-step process is economics. Because it's in the economics that you can use your economic collective influence to influence your politics. And the other floor was then judicial, because that's a system that is definitely, we have a long dysfunctional relationship with the judicial system. So everything starts with the economic base. What we have historically done and are still doing currently is we flipped the building, and we're starting with education. We're thinking that as the more education we get, then the more wealthy we become. And statistically, that's just not so. Actually, the more education we get, the more in debt we become. And we're still going, even though we're educated, we haven't changed and influenced the work market to represent our demographic. So we become educated, we have all these initials behind our name, but then we go into a work market that largely does not represent us. One of the primary employees of our demographic is the government. That's one of the primary employees. So we're not able to have a strong, a full-fledged political agenda, because we have no economic collectivity and strength. And that's all the other political groups and cultural groups that we're competing against, they have that. They have their lobbies, they have their PACs, they've got all that from a monetary base. So when you send that politician in, you're not asking that politician, what are you going to do for us? You're kind of saying, hey, if you want in, this is what's going to require. And the accountability is the money that we're sending, not waiting for the next 2 or 4 years for the vote. That it's too late at that point.
So I get what you're saying on a macro level in terms of economics, but on a micro level, we hear that conversation all the time. We see it all the time on social media, hear it in our social circles. Blacks have X amount, $1.2 trillion worth of spending power. But on a micro level, we see that we hold Black businesses, in my opinion, to a much higher standard of service than we do everyone else. So for example, you can have, John's breakfast joints, and one person goes there, has a bad experience, And that bad experience spreads like wildfire. We talk about, well, we don't have to accept bad service or, cheaper prices or higher prices. But yet, and still, we will take those same people will go to Walmart. And Walmart is notorious for not only destroying small communities, but notorious for having for cheap products and bad service. Is there a truth to the myth that Blacks believe that white ice is colder? Is there something to that?
The fact that you even have to ask, right? The fact that it's something you have to contend with is enough to set us off balance. You make the nuanced differentiation between macro and micro, but a mindset is both. And that's where I'm coming from. Everything I'm coming from, I'm approaching this from a mental health perspective, a cognitive-based perspective. And whether it's macro or micro, if your belief set is one that you believe their ice is colder, it's going to transcend any level that you want to take it. And our successes are individual. Our successes are micro, but our issues are macro. Our issues are systemic. So it's easy to get the feeling of some false sense of success when you have a few pockets here and there that are making six figures, that are living in a beautiful housing addition, have their own businesses, sending their kids to the finer schools, because you have pockets of our community that are doing that. But all of those communities, I would say, are fighting not to lose. No one's fighting to gain more ground. And we're competing against other culture groups that are playing a 25-year and farther ahead game. We're playing a week-to-week, year-to-year game. And it's just not working. We're always in reaction to. Gentrification, for example, is an issue. And you spoke very eloquently about that. I think it was last week on the podcast last week. But gentrification is one area where we're always in response to. We didn't value the property until they came and got it. And then all of a sudden we're raising hell, but it's too late at that point, because we're playing a reactionary game and they're playing a 10, 15, 20, 25, 30-year game. Generational economic power game.
So 2 questions, and the gentrification issue with me has always been one it hits close to home, because I lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for many years. And during my time up there, I saw it up close and personal. I saw, everyone for years and years and years, the conversation was, oh, they're going to move us out to the suburbs, and then they're going to, move back into the inner city because they want us out in the suburbs. And that made no sense to me, because I've made the argument several times that once we quote unquote make it, we move voluntarily to the suburbs. We're no longer victims of redlining. Certainly there is historical context there. I get that, but we're no longer victims of redlining. If I want to buy a house, I have the credit score and the income to buy a house pretty much anywhere in Milwaukee County that I wanted to. Same thing here in Orange County, with the exception of some, very wealthy enclaves. But if I want, I can move where I want to. Redlining doesn't really exist. It doesn't exist anymore. I get the history. And so, but specifically in Milwaukee, I literally watched urban neighborhoods blighted. And then now the city Milwaukee in the last 5 years, and there's actually a 10-year plan they're investing some $3 billion in this one specific zip code. And so slowly but surely, there's already areas that have been gentrified. And what is the first thing people scream? Oh my God, they're kicking us out. But when the land was cheap, when the houses were empty, Black businesses and developers weren't jumping on the opportunity to develop it and making it quote unquote Black. And so I've always made the argument, why are we so reactionary? Why are we not proactive? And when we move it, once we address the gentrification point, I want to talk a little bit about the political power. But go ahead, your thoughts on that.
Okay. I would like to just respectfully challenge your assertion that redlining doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. It's still in force. It's just rebranded and has co-opted and morphed into different practices. But you're getting the same statistical pattern of home sales by color. And in a lot of cases, there are I got a file of most recent 2018, 2019 lawsuits against a plethora of realty companies and loan and banks for that very charge. And they're paying out huge sums of money once it's discovered. So I would just encourage you and anyone who's on this discussion to start Googling that and look at how the game of redlining has morphed. But when your question, the bigger question of why are we reactionary, again, it's because we are not collective first. What we're trying to do is learn how to win their game, because we consider it their world. And that's a platform that will lead you down the same set of outcomes, because you're already tuned into it's their game. So you base your whole strategy on how can you curry their favor? How can you get them to write stuff in your favor? I'm challenging that mode of thought by first challenging our identity. So for example, those who identify by color, and I ask this question all the time. If you color, the race ideology is about superiority over inferiority. So in that ideology, which color is on top and which color is on bottom? Right?
Yeah.
You instinctively know that.
Yeah.
You instinctively know that. And my premise to that is that because we adopt that label of hierarchy, of color hierarchy, that subconsciously we also adopt the beliefs associated with that. So we don't play to our fullest potential. We play to the potential that Black has in the hierarchy of color. And we're giving our best shot. Whatever we do, we excel at. Whatever we put our mind to, we conquer, we overcome, we go at it. But you can take a successful counterpart in our demographic and compare it to their demographic, and you'll find that we're still falling way short. You can have a CEO of a Fortune 500 who's Black, and he's not getting the same treatment, the same level of respect, and the same perks and bennies that his white counterpart is getting. This is statistically proven. You can have a Black two-parent home, good credit, great income, compared to a white two-parent family, same level of credit, and they go to the bank for the loan. 9 times out of 10, the white family comes out with a better deal than the Black family for the same amount of property with the same level of credit. Because there is built in the system this belief, this ideology belief, that one is better and one is inferior.
We talked about being cohesive, and you said we're very segmented or fragmented. One of the issues I believe is that we're so easily distracted. It's like we are, and I hate the term playing checkers not chess, but that's essentially what we're doing. We're so easily distracted. Mm-hmm. I think we spend more time on the white employee that says the N-word versus his employer that won't hire Black people. Right. You kind of get what I'm saying? And I'm trying to figure out, how do we move past these distractions? There's a very popular cartoon in which one of the characters goes squirrel, and it's kind of easily distracted. I feel like that's the Black community. In a sense, we're very easily distracted. One of my biggest issues in talking about power and political power, because a lot, King and Malcolm X and Huey, they all recognize the power of politics. But I feel like as a community, and I think I do agree with conservatives that say that, our vote is taken for granted by one party and over the other. I think that we should have more leverage in that. And so I'm very open with people voting from whichever party they like to. I like that our vote to be earned. With that said, I've noticed, because I've lobbied for many years, I've been in all 50 states, I've been in many state houses, many communities. One thing is very consistent amongst Blacks versus other communities: holding our elected officials accountable. We seem to be happy and okay with having blacks in power. And I'm going to reference Milwaukee a lot because I spent a lot of time there. Milwaukee, Wisconsin is a majority minority city. They have a ton of representation on their city council, on their county board, and people of color. But they have never elected a black mayor or a black county executive in these areas, because it seems like, even though they're majority minority, it seems as though we're happy. You know, all the person's black, I'm good. They're black, I'm good. I don't really need anything out of them. How do we move from that to actually getting some political power and actually getting some movement on that, some political movement?
Well, to go back to your initial assertion of the squirrel analogy, we always get easily distracted. It's when you're playing inside, and I don't mean to sound redundant, but it all comes back to race ideology, belief in race. When you're playing inside the paradigm of race, black versus white, you have no other way to respond, because you've taken on that identity, and one has an internalized feeling of superiority. Another one has an internalized feeling of inferiority. I've got to prove to you, I've got to be 3 times better than you. I've got to outwork you just because of my pigmentation. And so now I'm even more extra sensitive if someone disparages me on any level, on a professional or personal level, and especially if that person who's disparaging me is white. It's a knee-jerk reaction. I had to learn how to consciously work through that. But assuming that identity of black, you automatically pit yourself against an identity who claims one of white. It doesn't matter how well-meaning you are, that's the race game. And you don't have to necessarily be intentionally racist. There are people who are intentionally racist that identify by color. But I believe, on the most part, and I think from most of our experiences, we identify by color without really a conscious intention of being racial in our perspectives. We're thinking that color is culture, but it isn't. Because there's a belief set associated with white and black that is always going to take over, especially in points of adversity. So we'll never move to the level you're talking about, to a proactive stage in this identity of color. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's 2019. It hasn't happened yet.
So you're saying we have to move away from essentially identity politics and move forward. And in moving forward, what would that be? I mean, if I can't identify as a group, if I can't identify as a race, how am I identifying to address the needs of Black people? How do we address that if we can't say that we're Black people, essentially, if we're not identifying as Black?
Well, you can recognize the racial construct. Because that's what the economic game is played on. So I'm not saying ignore the fact that it's here. You can recognize that, but that doesn't mean that is who you are. Okay, so if that's the game, all right, I understand that. Okay, that this color team gets this many chips, this color team gets that many chips. All right, now how can I make that work for me? How can we make that work for us? Well, the first step in that is to stop believing that you're that color. You might be playing that game because that's the economic, what's based on now. It's not an American game, it's a racial game in America. Okay, so when you look at that way, you can kind of dissociate yourself from this label identity of color, because it's those belief systems that, I don't care how accomplished you may believe you are, if you have taken on an identity of color and it's not white, you're automatically going to be perceived and looked at and treated at lower than, automatically. Not from just a perception thought, but from an outcome thought. If you're living in a Black neighborhood, the values are lower. If you are applying for a job, a company that is predominantly white, there's that mindset that you have to deal with. You're coming in, swimming upstream, going against the current, rather than having the wind at your back. And it's always a sense of struggle. And then if you get in there, you're really wary of your circumstances, because now you're either representing your community or you're just trying not to lose everything you work so hard to get. That's not a position of empowering, it's just a position of defense. So to become more empowering, we've got to separate ourselves from this color thing and operate from a collective thing. And that's why I love using Dr. Anderson's method, because whether you are Black or whatever you consider yourself, if we are collectively aligned economically, in our thinking economically, that's where our power base begins. And on a macro or micro level, until we start becoming influential with and respecting each other economically, we're not going to get the respect from those that we're looking to get equal pay, equal treatment, better, fairer sentencing, and all those things. That comes for a cost. You know, we're playing a moral game. We're thinking the Bible and Jesus and all that. They're not playing that game. You can be as Christian and moral as you can afford to be. I know that sounds very cynical.
No.
But you can be as Christian and moral as you can afford to be. The clients that I'm working with, they may, to the outer eye, to the more superficial person, they may look at them and say, well, they just need to go to school. They just need to be educated. But I'm in there on the front lines with them, and I know what they're going through, and I know their heart. They don't want to be in these environments. They don't want to do the things they're doing, but they haven't been put in an environment that will support their higher needs. And the one true fact about human development is you cannot survive and improve at the same time. Cannot be done.
I like the term surviving and improving at the same time. I've made that argument because I will pivot a million times in this conversation, George. I want to move on to criminal justice system, to criminal justice, but I've made the argument that one of the biggest issues in some of the urban and quote unquote black areas is that the reason why it seems so chaotic is that they're not comfortable enough to begin to take steps forward because they're always in survival mode, which is one of the major reasons why there's learning gaps and other different gaps statistically. But let's kind of move over there. I want to ask the question: how do we get out of that mindset that we are less than? And I'm going to reference that case because obviously it just happened. So how do you get a jury of mostly Black and brown people? I think there were 3 white jurors on that jury to be lenient on a white officer in a time in which the national conversation is unarmed and innocent Blacks being killed unjustly by white officers. We're pounding our fists saying they should go to jail. We got a conviction. We got a murder conviction, which is rare for a police officer. But then the judge left it to the jury here. I mean, it was almost like Dwayne Wade threw the lob up for LeBron to catch it and dunk it, and he missed the dunk. Why? How did that jury? Well, first of all, what are your thoughts on that? The jury come to that conclusion, number one, and number two, you kept talking about it's a mindset. How do we undo that mindset?
So with jury selecting, race is an integral part of the decision making for who gets on that jury. Absolutely. It's not spoken of very much. It's just people understand it, but they don't really give it the actual significance it plays in all of our jury sentencing. It's very psychological, and lawyers understand the psychological game better than probably us professionals in the psychological field. They understand it. So when they're testing you and they're bringing you up and asking you questions to determine your fitness for jury, they've got paid researchers that can assess by the answers you give how you see race and how you would respond to racial situations. And so both the prosecution and defense are fighting to pick the mindset of jurors that are going to be most friendly and accommodating to their side. But we don't see that part, so we just think it's just normal people coming in and there's the luck of the draw. So why are we doing that? It's been designed to do that. That jury and most juries are designed to get the outcomes that we then go and protest and march about. So even though if we want to try to ignore race and forget that race exists, the racial game is being played against us on a psychological level.
So how do we undo that mindset though? If our schools are, it's in one of the panelists brought up the fact that we're being educated at no matter what schools you go to, with the exception of HBCUs, you're being educated in a Eurocentric way, in a very Eurocentric America. But if our schools are teaching us to be Eurocentric, we certainly understand that our criminal justice system is set up Eurocentric. How do we undo that mindset though? How do we undo it?
All right, so this is the area that motivated me. That question you're asking is for me where the rubber meets the road. And I don't know why this aspect has resonated with me, but I know it's because in my work, I'm seeing the systemic impact of how it's really adversely impacting our community in a very negative basis. So until, and my whole work is about changing the way we're thinking in order to get different results with my clients. So that led me, and I don't want this to come off as a shameless plug, but I really believe in the work I'm doing. No. And that led me to write this book. It's not just a reading book, it's an actual workbook.
I'm not.
Beliefs Limiting Authentic Cultural Knowledge. This is my book, and I'm not even remembering my title. Beliefs Limiting Authentic Cultural Knowledge. And the first place you have to start is with yourself. So in the first chapter, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Penny, and there's no right or wrong answer. And if you don't want to answer, that's fine. No. But this goes out to anybody who's listening. Real simple question, no harm, no foul, but it's just to get you to think about yourself authentically. And the question in the first chapter asks, are you your color or are you your culture?
That's an interesting question. I think that my answers are never simple. I think it depends on where I am. If I am in quote unquote white spaces, I'm absolutely my color. I don't want to be my color because I hate the fact that there's a differentiation. I hate that. It drives me crazy. If I am with my family at a cookout, a barbecue here in the South, I am my culture because I am, in my opinion, my most authentic self.
And then so then when you're your culture, what is the name of your culture?
We consider ourselves Southern Black folk.
So that's a color then, isn't it? And that's still a color?
Well, Black, they consider Black Southern to be a different culture, although it should just be Southern because if we're honest, we're very similar to Southern whites. There's not much difference between us and Southern whites, not in food, maybe music. That's about the only difference. We all grew up in Southern Baptist churches. We all eat the same food. We all relate the same. Some of the educational statistics are the same. Believe it or not, divorce rates are the same. Poverty rates are the same. We're very similar. The only difference between the two is probably music. That's about the only difference. Whereas even though Blacks pretty much started country music, their current preference would be country. Our current preference would probably be blues. That's probably the only difference. So I would say Southern would be the culture.
So that was so profound what you just said. And every time I ask that question, I love asking it because it gives me insight to how a person is thinking, right? And from what I'm hearing from you is in your professional environments and environments that are not close to home within your personal sphere, you play to a perception of color that you would rather not have to play to, right?
Absolutely.
But when you're at home in your comfort of surroundings, you still integrated color into your identity, but actually you really talked yourself out of it by saying, really, it's just Southern. because we all do the same stuff.
We do.
We all do. We eat the same food. I think it's in one of Thomas Sowell's books, and in one of his early chapters, he references how basically everything initially, in terms of the Black demographic, we learned our early language practices from the poor white demographic. So again, it's going through that mindset of separating your authentic self from this label of color. And it's really important to have that process. And that's just the beginning of what this book does, because once we can start disassociating where we need to from this color thing to be our authentic self, because what I hear you, I mean, the little bit I know of you, I understand you to really be a very powerfully successful and motivated person. Imagine, and I might be sounding crazy, but just imagine how much more powerful you could be if you didn't have to deal with this whole label of color.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Imagine that. and I like to just push those boundaries mentally for people, because man, when you feel that sense of power and empowerment and freedom, Killer Mike is he's got his piece on the 10-point agenda, and he uses some really colorful language in addressing it, but he says, y'all free, why don't you act like you're free, right? The only thing that I would tweak on that statement of his is, you all are free, but why don't you believe you're free? You don't act because you don't believe. And you can't believe you're free if you've taken on a label that's tied to slavery and racial hierarchy.
I'm going to go to some of the Facebook comments. It's going to we're kind of backtrack just a little bit. Brother Rock says that spending power is consumerism, and he said we can't become a merchant class or manufacturing class, or we can keep repeating the narrative taught to us. What are your thoughts on that? And actually, I agree with him on that one.
So do I. He's on point. One of the candidates, I can't think, Yang, he's running for president, Democrat.
Is he the one that made the money promise?
The money promise. He's really hitting big on YouTube. I don't know if he's going to make a dent in the election process, but he's definitely affecting mindsets right now. But he's putting out this fact that by 2050, the average wealth per quote unquote Black family will be zero. All because we're not producing anything. So right now, as we stand, we're on the bottom of the average list of wealth per Black family. It's a pittance. I don't know. It's like thousands of dollars, and it may not make 10. It might be under 10, maybe 5 on average. Now you're going to have your pockets again that are outliers and exceed that. But on average, on a statistical average, the average wealth per Black family is around between $5,000 and $10,000.
According to Forbes specifically, this is 2010 data. It's dropped according to this graph that I'm looking at. According to Forbes, it was 10,400 in 2010. It's a fraction of that today.
So that's pretty serious, man. I mean, we don't, as a community, we don't value that as much. And the reason we don't is because by and large, the majority of us are in survival mode. So we can't even really take the luxury of time to really think about wealth generating practices to increase that statistical wealth number. And the only way to begin to do that is we have to change our consumerist practices. So the brother's right on point. And we're spending ourselves into, we won't have any other option but to be slaves again, because we won't have anything.
Do you think that the quote unquote Black wealthy in this country, do you think they're assisting in that consumerism? Do you think that they're helping to build wealth, or do you think that they're essentially separating themselves and not helping quote unquote the Black masses? Do you think they're all in it for self? Or do you think that by having, because I've heard a lot of time the argument is, well, blacks can't be doing that bad because you have Oprah or you have LeBron James or you have Tyler Perry. And with the exception of, well, those three, I would say kind of are exceptions because, Perry is actually building a lot of black wealth in Atlanta. He's trying to recreate a black, quote unquote, black Hollywood, but they point to those as the exceptions. And do you believe that that let's go to athletes specifically as a good example. Do you think that they are helping with the consumers, or do you think they're actually building something for Black America?
I think in their own way, they believe they're contributing to the community. They're doing, in their mindset, they're doing their part to try to give back, so to speak. But again, as long as you see yourself in racial terms, then the strategies you employ will fit the racial ideology. And most of it is largely subconscious. Because even what we've done is we've taken the ideology of the European and we've perfected it within our own community. To where we're harsher on each other than they are. We think less of each other than they do. So even if you're a police officer or a teacher or anybody in the human services field, you have adopted that ideology of color that you have low expectations for members of your community. So you're going to always approach them from a point of, you need a hand up. You're going to always need help, rather than from a platform of, here, man, here is your 40 acres. Now build this. And here's how you protect your money. And here's the next step from there to make it generational, so that our success doesn't have to rely on a few celebrities and a few athletes, but average guys, because the average person here outside of our community who's wealthy isn't depending on celebrities and national figures. It's in their system on a daily basis. And you don't have to be exceedingly great or highly intelligent and be smart. There was a time the average Fortune 500 CEO didn't even graduate from college, because he is in a system that says, come on in, Bob. Come on in, Joe. We got you,
White
bro.
Boys Club.
That's it.
The White Boys Club.
So it's about changing that. It's about changing that mindset of racial ideology, so that when you do make those levels of accomplishment, you're not chained. You're not that overgrown elephant on a chain. You know you can break that chain, and we're still in many ways on a chain.
I think you answered this question. I'm gonna go to a question by Ivo, but I wanted to kind of summate what you said with a quote, a rather famous quote, the old OJ quote. When he was at USC, he said, "I'm not black, I'm OJ." Is that the mantra that we should adapt as blacks in America?
The question I would pose to that is this: Can you truly be American, and all the things that means, all the things that America means, and be a color?
That's a deep question. That is a deep question. I don't believe that you can, because I'm tending to agree with you that you're limiting yourself. And I've said it in this conversation that I limit myself when I limit myself to a color. I'm not meeting that full, my full reality by limiting myself in that color. But to the Facebook questions, someone asked, are higher earning blacks in survival mode as well?
So I spoke to that earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I respect anybody in our demographic who has made it, because what successful, quote unquote, black individuals had to do is go through a very traumatic process to succeed. First of all, you have to wake up consciously aware of your natural inclinations so that you don't use them inappropriately. Being in our demographic, we see things differently. We perceive things in a much more internal way. We're much more soulful in our approach to life, where we're going into a culture, a corporate or work culture that doesn't see life that way. That doesn't make one worse or better than the other. It's just different. So when we go into a predominant culture that does not see things the way we see it, we have to play to their level of standards. So simple things like, and they're starting to relax a little bit, but it's still a process. So simple things like for Black men in the work environment, typically most Black men have to shave because a Black man with facial hair is perceived as intimidating. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. Black men in a corporate environment are seen as intimidating. And if you have any size as a Black male in a corporate environment, that's another faux pas. And to where most Black men who are aware that they are of physical stature have to figure out a way to diminish themselves, to not overtake a room. Black women, I mean, the things that they've had to go through to succeed, from hair to dress, to all those things, because you know what it takes to be a woman is much more complex than it takes to be a man.
That they're still dealing with.
They're still dealing with.
Yeah.
Individually, these may not be earth-shattering pieces, but they're always little reminders on a micro level to let you know you ain't running this. And if you want to make it, this is what you have to learn how to do. So what happens is the truly successful of us in our community, the truly motivated, will go, you know, especially if you're really driven and don't have an ounce of OCD, right? Some people are like just obsessive compulsive. What happens is you become so good at being the way they need you to be, you lose who you really are. Or you devalue who you really are because who they want you to be is paying the bills. Now you don't even know how to go back and be who you are. At some point, it's like I'm gonna go back to the hood with my boys,
right,
and they're looking at you funny.
Right, like who are you? you know.
So it's an unfortunate process, and you're always, even though you've made it, you're always looking over your shoulder just to make sure that you ain't gonna slip back. You can't just get totally comfortable in that environment because eyes are watching.
It's funny you said that. During my many days of lobbying and being in many state houses in DC and Capitol Hill, I pierced my ears, as an adult, because growing up watching guys like, I'll be honest, watching guys like Allen Iverson, I was enamored by those people, but I fell in love with diamond earrings. So I went out and bought a real pair of diamond earrings, and I pierced my ears, and I would wear them to work. And I remember vividly being in DC at a transportation committee hearing, and being pulled to the side and being told, and a guy pulled me and said, "Hey, that's really kind of unprofessional and ghetto. What's unprofessional and ghetto? Mind you, I'm in a brand new suit, and I think that I went out and bought an Armani suit just to really look snazzy and have on these real diamond earrings, and I was told that is ghetto and inappropriate by someone that didn't sign my paychecks, that I didn't answer to, that was another lobbyist for an entirely different company, there for an entirely different reason. And he felt the need to pull me aside and tell me that. This is what was mind blowing. He was Black. Blew my entire mind. But we're going to close up, but there's one more topic we're going to hit up before we wrap up, and that's racial showcasing. George, tell us, what is racial showcasing, and kind of give us a narrative of what exactly that is.
Well, that's the first time I've heard that term, so stop me if I'm going down the wrong path.
No, go ahead.
Give you how it comes across to me.
Mm-hmm.
When I hear that term, I think of the traditional quotas, tokenism. I see race now, the whole racial showcasing from that perspective is used in so many areas of media and marketing and money. Let's say, now I don't mean to pick on anybody when I say this figure, but let's say what's her name, Candace Owens. Candace Owens.
Yes.
That's an ideal, to me, an ideal picture of racial showcasing. because she's so inflaming in her rhetoric. Now, I'm not going to talk about the substance because some people agree with her, some people don't. And I'm not ever about trying to force an opinion down anybody. I'm more about process, right? Because it's not necessary for us to agree and see things the same way. Candace has her strengths, you know, Barack has his, you know, everybody, it takes a little bit of everybody, right? But I do take issue with the approach similar to what she uses and some others when using race in a way that drives the scenario rather than just addressing the scenario. And so I see racial showcasing made up from a social media attention getting, fulfilling numbers, looking acceptable. There's just so many ways I see that. Am I off the path on that or what?
No. It's as far as I'm reading, you're spot on. I guess for in layman's terms, it could be seen as token Negroism.
Ooh, yeah.
I mean, I hate to use that term, but that's that. I mean, in layman's terms, that's how you would describe it. And I hope that I'm not off base with that. Well, listen, George. One more plug for your book before we wrap up. The name of his book is B.L.A.C. Go ahead, George.
B.L.A.C. Let me get the title right this time. Beliefs Limiting Authentic Cultural Knowledge. And the premise of the book is addressing the race construct from a mental health perspective. And it's not about being Black, it's about beliefs in skin color, whether it's Black or white.
And where can we get the book, George?
It's available on Amazon.
We'll put a link. We'll definitely put a link in the group in Black Space. You guys to pick up the book support George. I am definitely going to get the book. Hopefully, it's a digital copy, George. I'm a digital guy.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. And lastly, the ADOS, the American Descendants of Slavery website is ados101.com. If you want to read more about the 10-point Black agenda, if you will. George, it's been a pleasure. As always, you bring a lot of knowledge to the table, brother. I look forward to some very fruitful discussions offline, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you guys for tuning in to Black Space Live. I have been your host, Penny Finley. We will see you next week. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Thank you.